Deep in the forested peaks of White Mountain National Forest is Livermore, New Hampshire, a historic logging town. Surrounded by the beautiful wilderness, it is a scenic municipality that, at 63.8 square miles, is 50% larger than Londonderry. It is rich with history and is a great example of past New Hampshire culture for anyone who cares to look. Decades of our state's story passed it by as it grew larger. It has a wealth of both land and beauty, and yet now, it is completely abandoned. (1870s New Hampshire). The Gilded Age is upon the nation, and booming tourism in the Granite State begins to relieve the rural decline. Thousands begin to appreciate the Lakes region, White Mountains, and seacoasts. Railroads are growing. Manchester's incorporated. Robert Frost is born. But what is perhaps the most important part to our story is that the logging industry begins to take off. Livermore was approved in 1874 for the operation of lumber mills by the Grafton County Lumber Company, founded by Charles W. Sanders and Daniel Sanders Jr. of Lawrence, Massachusetts. Soon the Sawyer River Railroad was created and the cogs of industry began to turn, and Livermore officially became a town in 1876. By 1880, there were 2 mills, 18 homes, and 103 inhabitants, and Livermore was still growing. Livermore operated like any other town. There were marriages, births, deaths. A schoolhouse provided an education to the 28 children in the town, and 2 teachers worked there and were paid $26 each. Many homes provided places to stay for boarders, one even holding 20 at one given time. The Saunders family owned the entirety of the town. The 2 brothers had invested $150,000 in both the village and the mills, which is equivalent to about $3.6 million today. Fire was not an uncommon occurrence in the town. In 1876, just 1 year after the first mill was built, it burned to the ground. It was rebuilt the next year, but it would burn twice again, once in 1909 and once in 1918. Much like other logging and company towns around it, Livermore had its conflicts with nearby industrialists. One pretty significant case of this was between the Saunders family and James E. Henry, who was able to acquire 45,000 acres of land from Livermore after taking the Saunders family to court. Henry and his son operated not only a logging business, but a mining business as well out of the land they acquired. They mined diatomaceous earth, which is a material with abrasive properties that has been historically used to polish metals such as silver and as a stabilizer in explosives. Both the Henry's mining and logging businesses were closed down in 1919. It's worth mentioning that James E. Henry's logging practices has made him a very disliked man in New Hampshire history. His method was a very destructive practice known as clear cutting, in which loggers chop down every tree in sight and leave the unsatisfactory trunks on the ground. Along with the fires that seemingly cursed the town, Livermore also suffered at the hands of disease. According to the book Logging Railroads in New England by C. Francis Belcher, Livermore was heavily affected by a smallpox epidemic in 1880, taking 40 lives. According to the book, those who passed away due to the epidemic were all buried together in a mass grave, marked by one gravestone somewhere in the woods. But in the end, it wasn't fire or disease that constructed Livermore's coffin. November of 1927 came around, and with it came unrelenting rain. A historic flood struck the region, affecting much of northern New Hampshire and Vermont. Rivers overflowed, towns were submerged, and 85 people died. In Livermore, much of the logging railroad and many of the bridges were destroyed, and from that point on, the town's end seemed inevitable. After 3 fires, the first lumber mill was rebuilt every time, but it had a much lonelier end. It simply closed down for good in 1928. With no working railroads to support the logging business, it was no more. In 1928, Livermore's people began discussing the sale of the town to the federal government. In 1934, the Forest Service and the Saunders family agreed on a selling price of $9 an acre, and all but a 12-acre parcel of land was added to White Mountain National Forest. 4 or 5 families did remain in the area for a little while, and the Saunders family heirs kept to themselves in their mansion. However, over the next few years, everyone would eventually leave the town for good. The government auctioned off much of the equipment that was left over in the abandoned mills and houses in 1944, and in 1949 the last resident left. In 1951, the New Hampshire state legislature unincorporated Livermore, and the town finally met its end. There was no more established town, No more people, only forest. While there may no longer be people here today, evidence of the town still remains. Brick foundations, rusting wares, and cellar holes indicate an overgrown history and an almost erased past. Sawyer River Road, one of the few modernized aspects within the Livermore's borders, is the only route to access the ghost town. About 2 miles down, the road splits the town in half. But if you're not looking for it, you might miss it, as it's camouflaged by the forest that retook it. The nearest town is Bartlett, which is about 9 miles in that direction. The road follows Sawyer River, its namesake. For the people of Livermore, the river was a blessing when they needed easy access to water, but a curse when the floods came in 1927. 5 to 10 inches of rain fell within a 24-hour period, which led to the flooding. Rivers throughout New Hampshire and Vermont overflowed so badly that even the Holyoke Dam in Massachusetts had a 15-foot surge. This is the foundation of the town's schoolhouse. In 1886, the schoolhouse was valued at $150, which is roughly $4,300 today. The school held an astonishing number of books, 403 volumes and 88 titles, despite only teaching no more than 30 students at any given time. The shell of a brick building rises into the forest, the ruins of the Livermore powerhouse. Images of this specific part of the town are perhaps some of the most iconic when it comes to remembering it. In 1961, the 12 acres of land that had not been sold to the Forest Service by Clinton Nash, who was the last heir of the Saunders family, was sold to Bob Shackford of Conway, New Hampshire. A Boston doctor offered $10,000 for the parcel. However, Clinton Nash wanted a New Hampshire native, and Bob Shackford fit that criteria. Shackford only offered $2,800 for the land, however, Nash still sold it. While Shackford could not reinstate Livermore as an official municipality, as that requires 8 residents and registered voters, he still made use of it. He built his family a small camp, which is still used today. I am standing where the Saunders family mansion once stood. During Livermore's time as a town, the mansion overlooked much of it. The house was partially burned down because of that fire in 1909. However, it was rebuilt. In 1965, it was completely burned to the ground. It is said that this was no accident, as Bob Shackford was forced to do this because of the state of disrepair that the house was in, and because of vandalism. While the building would serve no purpose today, its destruction is still another lonely part of this town's downfall. Standing here in the ruins of a place so easy to miss, and it's difficult to imagine that this was once a lively lumber community. The people of Livermore may have prospered for decades, but in the end, misfortune in the form of nature spelled the end of their community, and they were forced to leave it behind. Today, the town of Livermore is overgrown, empty, and almost forgotten. It rots away deep in the forested peaks of White Mountain National Forest, hidden amongst the trees. And while most people may never see it, the ruins of the town are still there, waiting for the day when even the forsaken foundations will lose to the retaliation of the forest.